Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. We have an amazing panel here that I imagine we're all going to be listening to quite intensely, even on a very selfish level, because we're going to be talking about cyber terrorism today and all sorts of implications. And we have an unbelievable group here. Let me just introduce them if they haven't been introduced properly already. General Alexander, you all know, used to run the NSA, and of course there are going to be lots of questions about what has happened on his watch and since then. Kevin Mandia is here. He is the C.O.O. of FireEye, and John Herring is here. He is the executive chairman of Lookout. Also, we call you a white hat hacker now, but there was a time you were a black hat hacker?
No, I've always been on the good side.
You've always been on the good side. Okay, let me start with this, and I ask it to you simply as a very, very selfish question. I got an email about 7 days ago as a customer of Chase, JP Morgan Chase, and the email told me that my bank accounts had been hacked, effectively. They told me that no money had been taken, but as I imagine many people in this audience who might be Chase customers saw, that our names were taken, our addresses were taken, our phone numbers were taken, and our email addresses were taken. But we are not supposed to worry about this at all. Are we supposed to worry?
Who wants to go first? What do you think? Actually, we could be flippant and say, no, don't worry. I think always we should be worried about cybersecurity events. When I look at the financial institutions, my perspective, they do more to protect our cyber credentials and other things than any other sector and industry, JP Morgan included. So when you look at that, from where I sit, I also bank at Chase. And I think they're a great institution. They're going to cover this. They're going to take care of it. The issue that I think is put on the table is, given that this is happening, what do we do about it? What do we need to do? And I mean, being here in the valley, the tech valley, we've got some great people out here, and back in Washington too, but we have great people. This is a problem that we should address head on. We've got to solve the cybersecurity issue.
Right.
And so I think, looking backwards is not going to solve this problem. And there are a lot of problems with the way it works, cybersecurity, today and yesterday. What we need is an integrated set of solutions for tomorrow. And
we'll get to those solutions in a moment. But just help me with this, Kevin. You work with these companies. Is JP Morgan a customer of yours? Can you say?
Yeah, I'd never ever say. So, but we're in the business of helping people solve these problems. When they get compromised, we try to answer what happened, what to do about it. And the reason, I wouldn't say I'm not worried either, but here's the reality. This is what we know about, is we've lost our addresses and phone numbers. But I have 4 different credit cards. I've lost 3 due to intrusions this year alone. We've already lost our addresses. We may have already lost our primary account numbers. If you go through all the great brands that have been compromised, it's hard to imagine that we haven't by now. So the fact that you get notification from JP Morgan that some of your privacy has already been kind of leaked through that, it's already been taken somewhere else.
So there's an article in the New York Times today that says the White House was alarmed by this. They were watching it themselves, did not understand it. What actually happened? So all of those addresses, what can people actually do with that stuff?
I mean, when you think about the amount of information that people gain access to, in this case, cyber espionage is a very different story than kind of mass market criminal activity where they're monetizing it for monetary gain, if you will. And I think what we're seeing is kind of a dichotomy of different attacks that range from more sophisticated ones on the nation state side to something that's more commercial oriented. And in this case, I think what we're seeing is the realization that security is really about economics. And in the past, it's taken 10 units of effort to defend for every 1 unit of effort to attack. And the burden has been on those who need to defend, especially commercial systems. And I think what we really need to start thinking about is, how do we shift that law of economics where it takes 1 unit of effort to defend and 10 units of effort to attack? Because once the information does perpetuate itself out there, I mean, you need to change significant amounts of your information to continue banking.
Is it possible, and we don't have to belabor the banking point, but let me ask you this. Is it possible that one morning I could wake up and not just me, but millions of Americans see their bank accounts at least appear temporarily, if not longer than that, at zero?
Look, I'll tell you an interesting story. 2 or 3 years ago, I was at DEF CON, this hacker conference. If you're ever in Las Vegas around August, definitely don't take a phone or a computer because you have 10,000 of the world's best hackers hanging out there. And I'm at this conference, and a friend of mine who was an amazing researcher named Barnaby Jack was like, hey, I have to show you something. And he shows me this ATM machine. And he says, watch this, and hits a button, and it starts jackpotting cash out of the ATM like a slot machine in Las Vegas. That moment made me really realize that any system can be penetrated. We need to think about things really in a fundamentally different way.
You work with these banks. Do you think it could go to zero? Could you see a mass? I mean, now that hackers are taking information in, not just from JP Morgan, but whether it be from Target or Home Depot or what have you, could we? I mean, I get paperless statements now, which means I don't get them anymore. I'm worried one day everything will just disappear into the ether somewhere.
I think, well, first off, as Debbie Gibson says, anything is possible. But at the end of the day, I think it's improbable, and there's a couple reasons why. Could it happen in cyber? Yeah, I think it probably could. And the reason the White House is alarmed is right now when there's no risk or repercussions of launching cyber attacks against our infrastructure out of Russia or China, to me it's fundamentally the equivalent of the New York Giants not letting Tom Brady complete a pass during a whole game, but there is no pass rush. There are no linemen. You can just throw passes all day long, and you're going to get a lot of completions. And that's why we're seeing these intrusions happen, is you can hack with impunity with no risk of repercussions. But if you drive it down to zero, first, I think our money will still be there. The accounts may read zero, and we'd have to do a transaction roll back to something. But I'm convinced the deterrent for that activity is probably not in cyberspace. I think that's crossing a line, crossing rules of engagement, and crossing what we would tolerate.
General, who is behind this stuff? I mean, who do you think is really doing all of this?
None of us up here. We all have alibis. Now, well, you have three groups. And one of the things that I thought Mandia did, Kevin did with his company, was expose APT1, the Chinese threat, and the theft of intellectual property. So you see one set of countries like China going after intellectual property. See others doing it crime. And I think that your point on the criminals have an advantage here. They can scan all of these accounts, everybody's access here at network speed, and find one vulnerability, and they can get in. You have others that are going to use it as an element of national power. So you have all of those coming together. And I think underlying all that is a rapid change in technology that's going on that makes this so difficult. And that's why I think when we talk about this, you have to change the way we have to change the way we do cybersecurity. And I think that's where the approach has to change. And I agree, I think that's exactly right. You've got to make it easier to defend by orders of magnitude. And I think the banks actually, the financial institutions, let's be real honest here, they do more in cybersecurity than anybody else. They lead our country in cybersecurity efforts. And so they're the best. If you want to be worried, to take down a bank, all you got to do is hit a power company. And so when you look at the critical infrastructure, we have problems in cyberspace. So I would be more worried about losing power on the Northeast power grid or something like that than I would about our bank accounts being driven to zero.
You agree with that? Is there the most critical pieces of infrastructure out there? Not Jennifer Lawrence, great article in Vanity Fair this month about her photos being hacked, but the thing you worry about most in terms of what's at jeopardy, what's at risk right now?
Yeah, I think it's utilities. I think, I was in New York in August of 2003 and the electricity went out, and it was fun for the first 3 days. But, over time, discipline probably starts to wane. If you can imagine in the winter, if the utilities went down in the mom and pop utilities in the Midwest, there'd be significant challenges. But I also liken it to having responded to intrusions in every industry. An analogy I use, it's one thing to buy a gun, meaning have the capability to shoot someone, and then actually do it. I think attackers do have the capability to hack into the utilities right now, because you can't pitch a perfect game on defense every day. But I think there's a huge gap of hacking a utility to then, in fact, trying to shut it down, because, again, the response that this country will have to that will not be in cyberspace.
So you're asking a question here, and I think we ought to just slightly change parts of it. Those countries that wish us harm, there's two major ways they can come at us: terrorism and cyber. If you're a country like Iran or North Korea, you can't come at us conventionally. If you disagree with sanctions, you disagree with our policies, the only way you can come at us is terrorism and cyber. And terrorism, to be honest, we have great counterterrorism capabilities with the tools, the intelligence community, the military, and what's going on. I think that's been very effective. So where are we weakest? Cyber. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to exploit that weakness. And that's what we've got to address.
Okay, let me flip this conversation around a little bit, because we've been talking about how to protect us, and this involves how to protect us, but we're in Silicon Valley right now, or in San Francisco, around a lot of big tech companies. And a lot of tech companies, frankly, have had a lot of trouble, with some of the things that the government has done and said and not allowed them to say about some of the things the government's trying to do to protect us. I should tell everybody this morning, Twitter sued the U.S. government over the idea that they can't tell the public how many requests they're getting, or in this case, it sounds like that they've never gotten a request and that's all they want to do is tell the public, we've never gotten a request. What should these tech companies, whether it's Google or Facebook or Microsoft, be able to tell the public, and what is really at risk and at jeopardy from your perspective?
So, a great question. And this is, for all of us here, when you think about this, what's at risk? Security of our nation and our people. And I had the opportunity, a privilege, honor, to sit in some of these meetings as we talked about just this kind of thing. You had Eric Schmidt, and you talked to all the folks that are out there. And I do agree, we've got to have some level of transparency so that the world knows that what we're asking them is logical. We're not just saying, give us all your data so we can go do ABC. And it's got to be put forward in a way that European countries and others know that this data is actually helping protect them too. So how do we do that? How do we set the rules of the road? And everybody says, well, you're spying on Europe, and Europe's spying on us. These are tough issues when you start to get right down to this big question about, so what do we say about it? And let me give you an example. Take Iran. There's a lot of things that go on in Iran and around Iran. And one of the things that I have great concern about is Iran, Israel going or coming to a war. And I think we should all be worried about that. I think that's what the White House is working, the P5+1 and other things. And so you've got issues out there like who supplies them with material to do it? Why are they doing it? And what's the next step, and what happens if they get a weapon? Do we have a nuclear Middle East? Is it a stable nuclear Middle East? And where do those weapons go? And if one of those ended up back here or with one of our allies, were we responsible for not doing our job here?
I appreciate all those issues, but none of those issues would be answered by the public declaration from Twitter saying that they haven't gotten a request from you.
They haven't gotten a request from us? Yet. No, I'm just kidding. You said they haven't gotten a request from us. I'm not in the government anymore. Right. But what Twitter wants, and I think what Google wants, and I'm halfway in between, they want to be able to say, look, they're only asking for this much. Facebook, 1.3 billion people. They asked for 270 different warrants. Why can't they say this amount? The issue becomes if you say a certain specific amount and they see this tracking to a new capability, Twitter or the next one, and somebody says they're tracking them on this, they're tracking terrorists here, then the law enforcement and the intelligence community's capabilities to track bad guys is seriously impacted. So that's where the debate is. So what do we need to do on that? I'm not sure how to solve that question all the way, but I do think transparency is important, and I think our government has to back these companies up. That's where I sit on it.
John, you're in the hacking business. Edward Snowden, hero, traitor, villain, what?
It's a very complicated kind of cross-section of privacy, security, civil liberties. And I think, at a fundamental level, and I speak for a lot of people here in Silicon Valley, increase in transparency is incredibly important. And I don't think there's anyone you'll meet here who would disagree with that the debate that's come out of what Edward Snowden has done has been a vigorous and a healthy one. I think that there's, a pretty broad range of opinions on what's actually happened. And I think the catch-22 is, and you'll find this with, a number of Silicon Valley companies, is we're finally starting to see the challenges manifest themselves, that the transparency and the spirit of that debate, and we share in this, Lookout has transparency reports. We actually built an open source privacy policy to help drive transparency in this regard. We're on that side of the equation. Yet at the same time, I was just in Europe and had a debate with a number of the top CEOs of telcos through Europe, and it was one of the most fierce and heated debates I've ever seen, to the point where it's starting to cause, challenges in the ability for American companies to actually do business abroad, and we're inherently global businesses. So, it's what I would say is it's incredibly challenging in that the transparency is really important, and I'm glad to see that debate happening. But I do think that we are now in a state where there have been costs associated with that, and I think that we're going to start to see that in the coming years. Those costs
Those are business
become very
costs,
real.
not
Yes.
additional risk costs. He would make the additional risk argument. We can go to that in a minute.
Yes, when I'm referring to this, I'm talking about business costs. And at the end of the day, our goal is to build amazing services to proliferate them across the world. We need to be able to operate freely, and we're actually starting to see, kind of infringement in our ability to operate freely because of this. So there's two sides to the equation.
I'm going to, before I get to you, because there's a long conversation to be had about the risks that may have been added or not added to the system as a result of some of the things that Edward Snowden disclosed to the public. Do you believe we're more at risk because of some of the things that emerged?
I think that there's one person sitting up here that's probably the most capable of answering that question. From my perspective, I just noticed the irony of it all was that the Chinese have been hacking us for 10 years, stealing our intellectual property. If we have lawsuits pending against state-owned entities in China, either here or there, they hack us and take that information. If we're doing mergers and acquisitions in China, they steal it. The Russians absolutely overlook almost all the credit card theft that's being done by organized crime. But the balkanization of the internet is somehow going to be caused by the United States of America. I think that's ironic. But I can feel it. I was just in Europe as well. And for the services that we provide, Germany wants the transactional data for German citizens to stay in Germany. Russia wants it to stay in Russia. And you can feel this balkanization starting, and it's going to impact a lot of companies that are trying to do business globally.
I mean, the real question to ask is the internet becoming more open or more closed? And my true fear is we're moving to a world where the internet's becoming fundamentally more closed, not open. General,
let me ask you to respond to this. This is your friend, Glenn Greenwald, on what Mr. Snowden brought out and some of your responses. He says there's zero evidence that this program collecting everyone's phone records as opposed to just the terrorists in any way keeps us safer or is necessary to stop terrorist plots.
So my candid answer to that would be bullshit. Let me give you a case in point. In 2009, NSA, using the FAA 702 capabilities, intercepted an email from an al-Qaeda terrorist talking to someone in the United States about building a bomb. In the text of that email was a phone number. Because of the authority that we had, our job was to connect the dots and give that to the FBI, which we did. That was in September, early September 2009. The FBI came back and said that phone number and that email address, after 2 days, they had to issue a national security letter, said belongs to Najibul Azazi. And given that, based on the authority of Congress, the courts, and the administration, that's whose program this is. It's not an NSA program, it's our nation's program. NSA was allowed to look. First, you had to document that we were going to do this. Everyone is documented. We looked in there and said, Zazi's talking to a guy in New York City who's talking to guys in eastern North Carolina and Chicago who are talking to terrorists. That guy in New York City, there's something there. You need to go look. What we could do is piece that together through 3 hops where the FBI would take days to get there. The guy in New York was Addis Medjugorje. If you recall, about the 9th or 10th of September, Zazi started traveling across the country, And the FBI stopped this, and it was supposed to be a 14-15 September bombing of the New York City subway, which would have been the biggest attack on U.S. soil since 9/11. Stopped by those two programs. So everybody says, well, you could have done it other way. No, you talk to Jim Comey, you talk to Bob Mueller, and what they'll tell you is the programs that they have take too long when you have a crisis like this. That's one of the cases. Now, there's some other things, though, that you ought to consider. And here's for us, for the American people. If Snowden had said, I disagree with this program, and raced outside and put it up, I think he would have had noble intent. What he did is he took over 1 million documents, including some of our allies, went to China and then to Russia to expose a system that the nation's courts, Congress, and administration had approved. And you can't tell me that he isn't now working closely with the Russians. Case in point. We have a number of media folks here in the audience. I challenge any one of you to call up Putin and ask him a question, like Snowden did. There is zero chance that he's going to answer that phone and make you look good. So why did he do that with Snowden? We've got to ask ourselves, who's being hurt here? We are. Our best government intelligence capabilities and our companies. That's the advantage this country has, our economic wealth and our intelligence and military. Who benefits from this? Russia. That's my concern. And I think we're naive if we think that Snowden is a hero in exposing it this way. If he wanted to be a hero, he should have said, I disagree with this program, taking it to Congress and taking it public like that. But by taking over 1 million documents and then giving them out to journalists to have them parade them as they see fit is wrong.
Do you wish the program was different? If you could go back in time and change it?
I wish we had a way of stopping terrorists that was better. Absolutely. You know, that's the fact. Here's what we did. We put this on the table. If you can come up with a better way, help us do it. So let me turn it around. I mean, we've had the greatest minds in the country work this issue. When you think about what's going on in the program and the controls that are in it, that 16 judges 37 times have found it constitutional with the ways that they're putting it together, from my perspective, that's a pretty good program. More importantly, not one person at NSA has been found doing anything wrong in the 15 months of review that had not already been reported. Think about that. For over 30,000 people in almost a year of investigation, not one person was found doing something that hadn't already been reported. That's amazing. And that's because we have good people working it. So if you want to know who the hero is here, it's those people back there that work every day to keep this country safe. Those are the heroes.
Okay, I want to throw it open in just 1 minute because I'm sure there's a lot of views and a lot of questions, and we will get everyone to have an opportunity to get a shot on goal. One question that relates to what you just talked about and this idea that maybe it might get harder over time for the government to be able to do some of the surveillance that you say is so important. So Apple recently released its new iPhone, it's iOS 8, and in that system, as many of you know, they've said that everything in it is effectively encrypted, or at least emails and other things like that. The next Google Android system is going to be similar. And there have been people inside the government who have said they have a huge problem with this. What I'll ask it to you guys. You guys are the hackers. Has Apple put us at risk, or are they doing their customers a great service?
It's just equal and opposite compelling arguments, right? I mean, the challenge with encryption is you can't monitor it. That's simple. And that's even from a company's perspective. If you encrypt all your network traffic and you're trying to defend your network, that means you need to decrypt it to figure out what's going on. So if you can't decrypt, you can't inspect. That's simple. So the equal and opposite.
You can't connect the dots. So you're into a position now, and you can understand both sides of the argument. And today we want better privacy. You lose another 3,000 people in almost $1 trillion from an attack, and people are going to say, where were the government and why didn't they defend us? So I think the government's got to say, look, I need tools to do it. This isn't something where Johnny Carson can be the great Karnak and say the terrorist is that one over there. You need tools, you need information. And the question that we have to answer is, what are we going to do to help give the government that, and what restrictions will we put on them to protect our civil liberties and privacy? That's what the courts, Congress, and the administration did with these programs. And so it's going to come back. I guarantee you. We come up to a way that you can't track it, they will get through.
But
you have several
You're the
terrorist
hacker.
attacks.
Can't you still track it from the telephone companies? Aren't there going to be so many other ways that you can still get at this information?
You hear about this concept of going dark, and I think that, whether we like it or not, whatever your opinion is, we're going to see a response where technology companies are going to bias and force the discussion in a different light by using encryption technologies and messaging, using things like SSL more prolifically. There's a whole host of different technologies that will make it inherently more expensive for monitoring to take place. Don't mistake the word expensive in the context of monitoring for impossible, because I think one thing we'll find is whatever is difficult today may be possible tomorrow with new revelations that come about. And I think the reality of the situation, anything can be broken, anything can be hacked with enough resources behind it. But I think what you will see in the short term is a massive shift towards companies actively making it much more difficult for monitoring to take place, as a sign of their belief that privacy should exist. Whether right or wrong, that's the direction I think we see things going.
Controversial topic with lots of different views, up here at least, and I imagine there's lots of different views in the audience, so why don't we try to open it up and take some questions from those of you who want to have at it. Go ahead.
Thank you. General, last night my 7-year-old son handed me a coded message here, and it got me thinking. I cracked it, by the way. But what are we doing in this country when you've got adversaries that can put a lot of resources towards cyber attacks? What are we doing here to make sure that we build that capability in this country, but also that those capabilities get into the public sector?
That's a great question. So 2 parts. And I know the last panel did talk a little bit about education. So for your son, science, technology, engineering, and math. I would encourage him to go in. We need to strengthen our programs there from an educational perspective. 2, there are lessons that have been learned from the government that should be pushed out to industry on cybersecurity. And I think there's an opportunity. I think some of the work that you did with the APT and some of the things that we're talking about, a holistic defense, are things that we ought to do. And I think this is an area where we can have partnerships and alliances with other countries as well. There's great opportunities here. I don't think we should sit back. I think we should step forward. The past is behind us. I think now what you're bringing up is, your son is our future. They're the future. We got to get them the education and the tools. It's advancing at tremendous rates. And from my perspective, these are great opportunities to secure our nation by building a bridge between government and industry, not severing it. And I think we have to do that. Look, government cannot protect this nation by itself. We need industry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am.
Jody Westby, Global Cyber Risk. So General Alexander, I would disagree with you that there have been 16 judges that determined 37 times that the NSA's program was constitutional. Because in fact, there was not even a legal opinion about the legality of the program until 2013, 7 years after it was begun. So we now know that the NSA is collecting in bulk telephone calls, emails, chat, videos, photos, text messages, and stored data, and can keep data on U.S. citizens or residents for 5 years. Now, we have national security to protect, but we also have civil liberties to protect. So is it really necessary that the NSA collect all of this content? I'm glad to hear you're not calling it metadata any longer. Content on individuals just because you might need to catch a terrorist?
Well, I think your facts are wrong. On the metadata program, 16 judges found it constitutional 37 times and rendered an opinion in each of those. So that's point 1.
For FISA opinions?
Yes.
Yeah, wow.
And so if you just want to say, well, their job is to ensure that what we execute is constitutional. And the second part is everything that NSA collects. Look, NSA is not out collecting stuff on its own. NSA is doing this for the good of our country. The rules in these programs are set up by our Congress, our courts, and the administration. These aren't NSA programs. These are our nation's programs. And so, yeah, we ought to argue over them, and we have a right to argue over them. But at the end of the day, the question is, what do you want to do for security and versus civil liberties and privacy? And in fact, I think you can do both. And you may have seen the opinion from Jeff Stone. Let me give you my assessment of that. I was shocked, stunned, and amazed when I heard Jeff Stone was going to be on the review group for NSA for this programs. Jeff Stone is a board member of the ACLU, and I thought there was no way we'd get a fair hearing on that. But look at what Jeff Stone said about NSA, how good the people are, that they followed the law, and that they stopped terrorist events. He made that publicly. Now, he doesn't agree with the programs either, just truth in lending. And so we should have an argument over the programs, but at the end of the day, our argument shouldn't be with the people of NSA. It's not their law. It's our nation's law. The Congress, the courts, and the administration said it. NSA is responsible for executing it. And so if you want to villainize somebody, look at the terrorists that we're trying to stop. Look at ISIS. Look at what's happening around the world. You need intelligence to do this. And what we can't afford to do is to say, well, we don't want to do any of it. Because at the end of the day, I have 16 grandchildren, and so the question that came up here, I want to see them grow up to have a great life too, and I want them to have civil liberties and privacy and security. And we can do both. And we had to fight and argue to get to the right thing. But at the end of the day, if you get 16 different judges to say this is right, in my opinion, that's pretty good. Now, there was one who, outside of the FISA court, disagreed with it.
The former chair of the FISA court. Thank you.
Okay, we will let both of them continue this debate afterwards, but we're going to continue with a couple of questions rapid fire because we only got a couple minutes.
Yeah, hi, my name is Ben. I'm also a student at Stanford and previously served in the Israeli intelligence. I'm very interested, so you mentioned China and Russia, and they have the comparative advantage that they collect all the data on all their citizens and involving civil liberties. So in a democracy, how do you draw the line for the people in the NSA between privacy and the need for security and fight off that comparative advantage that these countries have?
So any data that NSA collects, if it's in a program like what we just talked about, the judges put constraints on what you can do, what you audit, and how you prove you've done the data exactly right. So every time you touch the database or everything you do with that, it's an auditable event. All the other data, which I think was what was being referred to on a global thing that you collect, that information runs under Attorney General procedures, under executive order, what we call UCID 18, which is how we protect U.S. citizens. Every person at NSA who touches data has to go through that training. And if they make a mistake, it's recorded. They have to go back through training, and it's reported to Congress, to the courts if applicable, and to the administration. And that may be one coming in right now. So the difference is NSA in this area is the most regulated agency there is and the most overseen. I think that's prudent. But also when you look at what's happened in all these reviews, what everybody's found, including a board member of the ACLU, is, well, they're doing what we asked them to do. Now, I don't agree with what we asked them to do, but they're doing it exactly right. So I think we should take great confidence in that. I think the issue that I would add to this, though, is so what do we do to help protect our allies? And what happens when some of this data is helping to protect them is also being used against us in some of the issues that have been brought up here? That, well, you're collecting this, so we'll balkanize the internet and punish U.S. industry. That's wrong. I think that's the stuff we got to push back on.
Final question. We got the countdown clock on our side over here, so go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Csaba Szabó from Hungary, and I can see a lot of trends in Hungary kind of overshadowing some of the things you're saying, as government is trying to snatch a lot of civil data and information about its citizens. I'm wondering if NSA or any government organization see a role in establishing a platform for the freedom of speech for average citizens. So we don't need to develop maybe a two-tier internet where I need to actually pay so I can state my opinion anonymously or in a way that I'm not going to be hunted on later in my life. Thank you.
Well, I'll hit the first part and then throw it over. But there is, I think, an opportunity here to, especially for securing critical infrastructure, to have an area which is heavily scrutinized to ensure the security of it, which is different from what kids and other things want to do out in what we'll call the Wild West. Both of those have to have some level of security and stuff on that, and that's options that people have talked about, but I'll throw it to Kevin and others.
Yeah, just real quickly, right now, when you look at social media, if you're a government, you like to pierce anonymity behind who's selling this on eBay, or who's posted this on Facebook, or who's using this Gmail account, or who tweeted this, and you want to see the IP addresses and where they are. The United States generally has that information here. And as we see all the FUD around what the U.S. government's doing, as I've met with representatives of other sovereign countries, quite frankly, they want that information for their citizens and they can't get it easily. I would be interested in how would Google respond to a Russian request for, I want to pierce anonymity behind this Gmail. I don't even think the Russians ask. I think they just find a way to get it. But that's another driver for the balkanization. A lot of sovereign nations want to track what their own people are doing.
Final thought from you?
I think the other piece of this is there's actually strategy on a company level now of where data is hosted, where it resides, actually how you think about architecting your systems based on not only the technical complexities, but the legal complexities of different nation states and requests that exist. And so this is the game theory of how businesses operate now, incorporate global policy as it is a mechanism for them to express their intent around privacy and security. So.
We're going to have to leave the conversation there. My thanks to John, Keith, and the General. You've been hacking everybody's account in the audience while we've been sitting here. Thank you, everybody.